Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 180, where we are going to talk about how to argue better for a better relationship, for better love. And I'm going to give you some highly suggested basic ground rules for navigating conflict in a much better way, in healthy ways. So this episode is a great one to listen to with your significant other if they are willing. Remember, we don't want to force our partner into something they're not willing to do. That will only cause power struggles. And if your partner isn't into listening, I have some notes on that, some tips on that for you towards the end of this episode, so hang on for that. But if your spouse is open to listening and growing and trying these on, that would be amazing. So definitely invite your spouse if you think they may be open to listening. But before we dive in, if you've been enjoying or benefiting from the podcast, here are some ways you can support it. The first thing to do is just make sure you're subscribed and that you stay on top of keeping the downloads on. So that means, at least on Apple Podcasts, you just want to make sure there's that little check mark in the upper corner that says you are receiving the downloads. If there's a little arrow instead of a check mark up there, just click the arrow and it will help restart downloads, which go off if you miss 2 or more episodes in a row. Another really important way you can support the podcast and me is to leave a 5-star review on Apple. I love seeing those reviews so much, and it really does touch me and keep me motivated to keep up this podcast. And even better than that, it helps this podcast reach more highly sensitive people, which will change their lives for the better. So it's a very concrete and so easy, such an easy way to make a real difference in this world right now. Lastly, you can donate just $3 or more to support the podcast. And I'm going to give you the podcast map, which is like a trail guide to help you make the most of the podcast and find answers to your relationship questions so you can have a better marriage as a highly sensitive person. The link to do that and get that map is in the show notes and under the podcast tab over on my website. It's a little drop down button below the podcast/blog tab. So definitely get that. That's an 11-page guide and it's beautifully done with all these little illustrations and really will help you answer really important questions that are unique to you and your marriage. All right. So that's how you can support the podcast as well as benefit more yourself. So as someone who has heard all about the inside of hundreds and hundreds of marriages, I want you to take this from me. Fights or arguments, we might call these conflicts and disagreements as well, they are simply part of being in an intimate, committed relationship. Yes, even a very healthy and overall happy one. So I'll say that one more time because I know as HSPs, this can feel different, strange, uncomfortable, but conflicts are a normal part of a healthy relationship. And luckily, conflicts don't have to be painful or detrimental to your marriage. They can actually be an important part of growing a more deeply intimate, connected, and supportive marriage. And if you're conflict averse, again, like so many HSPs are, really take that in. And taking that a step further, I highly recommend listening to episode 95, which is called Conflict Aversion to Conflict Comfort. That's going to help you understand what I'm talking about here a little bit more and help you feel more comfortable with it, which is really, really important. It will actually make conflict easier when you feel more relaxed about it and even can see that there are benefits to it. So have a listen to that episode. Now, even though conflict is important, normal, and even healthy, it also can definitely be detrimental to our relationships if you don't have some key skills and ground rules in place around it. And that's why I'm coming to you with this episode today, because I want you to have those. And these ground rules and skills aren't always talked about, especially the ground rules. I certainly didn't used to know them, but I have found in my own marriage, as well as in my clients' marriages, that when both partners agree together on a few basic ground rules for conflict, it can change conflict from being something that is detrimental, that causes a lot of suffering, that causes a lot of ongoing division and breaks the marriage down, into conflict being something that brings you closer, that resolves issues, and that can be navigated smoothly, gracefully, and with no real pain. So, choosing some basic ground rules for conflict with your significant other is what I'm going to suggest highly that you start doing, starting with this episode. So these ground rules will help stop any conflict from becoming a chaotic, painful screaming match or an ammunition-filled battle, and will help you navigate it so much more peacefully and effectively. And like I just said, with the least pain possible and the most ability to actually solve the issue at hand. So in this episode, I'm going to suggest 9 possibilities for those ground rules today. But first, I want to make sure that you understand that you don't have to onboard all of these 9 different suggestions at once. In fact, that's probably going to backfire if you try, because it's just going to be too overwhelming to keep track of and implement all 9 at once. Okay? So you may end up not implementing any of them if you try to do all of them. So instead, I suggest you listen to this list of them and then choose 3 of your favorite sounding ones to be your primary ground rules to start with. So after you play with those ones and implement those ones for a while, later you can start including more of the other ones. And yes, ideally, you would eventually get to using all 9 of these suggestions and perhaps other ones that you hear about or come up with. But I want to reiterate, start simple. Start with just 3 at a time. Maybe even start with 1 if 3 starts to feel overwhelming, okay? Small changes actually made add up to huge positive change over time. So are you ready to hear the 9 basic ground rules for conflict that I recommend? I highly recommend taking notes on these or coming back and listening to this section again later when you have a pen and paper. All right, here we go. Number 1, don't interrupt. I've talked about this one before on an episode about communication tips, I think, 5 tips for communicating better or something like that. I've probably talked about it other places because this is so important, just in general with communication. So this is not limited to conflict, but it's extra specially important in conflict. Listening well is one of the very best ways to get back to understanding and peace, and to allow conflict to be a source of deeper connection. So don't interrupt when you are fighting or arguing. Talking over each other, interrupting, just makes the other person feel disregarded, that what they're saying doesn't matter to you, that their feelings are not valid, all of which just makes conflict worse and a relationship so much harder. So commit to not interrupting. Commit to listening to what the other person is saying and taking turns speaking, of course. But the main rule here is do not interrupt. It's so simple and yet not always easy, right? All right. Number 2, keep to the issue at hand. So this really means don't use complaints about other areas of your life together or other incidents as ammo against your partner in this particular issue that you're talking about. For example, if the topic you're discussing is about how you've forgotten to communicate instructions for the kids, like post-school pickup a couple of times, like if you've forgotten that and your partner is, upset at you about it, don't then bring up how he doesn't do the dishes enough. Another example would be, if your partner didn't do the dishes and he said he would, and you're upset about it and you're confronting him about it, don't bring in how he also always forgets to pay the bills and never volunteers to help cook dinner, etc., etc. You get the idea, right? So just don't bring other issues into the current issue. That's going to make it so much more complicated. And when we start collecting other wrongdoings and bringing them into the topic at hand, we're going to fuel more bitterness and we're going to prevent solving the original issue. So keep your conflict about what's actually happening now without kind of scooping all the other bad things or even one other quote unquote bad thing or problem that came up into the conversation at hand. Number 3 is kind of an extension of this. But it's a little more specific. It's don't bring past issues in to this current issue. Although oftentimes the issue at hand is rooted in a larger issue that's come up in different ways in the past, again, bringing up past wrongdoings or hurts can escalate the current conflict and once again prevent you from solving the issue at hand. So an example of this from my own life was an argument my husband and I had one on vacation a couple summers ago. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll know I talked about this summer and we were having a lot more conflict than normal that summer. There was actually a fairly substantial issue that had kind of come up for us. And we were on vacation and the issue came up again. It had to do with him biking and kind of wanting to go off all the time on adventures. And I was feeling really like he was neglecting other things in our lives, including me and my wants and also our family. And so I brought up when we were having a conflict about, or actually it was more like a discussion about how this issue had come up. I started bringing back in a moment where he had been really not cool, like really disrespectful. But it was a similar issue, a time he literally just biked away. So it was all too easy for me to bring that time that he just biked off and get mad at him more about that now and bring that past issue into this current one. So I hope that makes sense. But that really just makes the current issue so much harder to deal with. You don't get anywhere in the current issue when you start bringing in all the past stuff, at least in the heat of the moment. So here's the tip on this. Solve this issue first, and then if this conversation sparks something from the past that you feel also needs to be resolved, which is totally valid, have a separate conversation about it after you've solved this current issue. I am definitely not saying that other issue isn't important. In fact, it might be more important than the current issue, but work on this current issue and then get to working on that potentially bigger issue. But don't convolute the two and bring them all together and turn them into sort of this tornado, right? It's just going to make things so much harder for both of you. All right, number 4, no name calling. This one's so simple and straightforward. If you're going to use name calling, you're going to escalate harder emotions and make it more likely that everything you say falls on deaf ears and just turns everything into so much more of a power struggle and so much more suffering. So do not use name calling. Number 5, very similar, same consequences, so simple, no yelling. Yelling is different than using an irritated tone or using a slightly elevated voice. You guys can work together to decide what actually constitutes yelling for you. Usually it's louder, more decibels in volume, right? But there's no need for yelling. In fact, it makes communication so much harder. Number 6, this one's really important, I think. Take a break. Take a break when you need to. So instead of yelling or storming off or calling each other names, when you start to feel really heightened or you start to dissociate and be emotionally flooded or be forgetful, take a break. I call this the HSP timeout. It's kind of like a break to help you both regulate and settle so you can come back to and be better able to resolve and work through things. So I'm going to be bringing you an episode really soon all about it. So be on the lookout for that. I believe it's an essential tool or skill to have as an HSP. So what you want to do in order to take a break in a simple sense, and again, I'll elaborate more soon in a different episode, but be on the lookout for when your emotions get really escalated, right? Just be aware of your emotions. And when they get overly escalated, tell your partner you need a bit of time to collect yourself so that you can work better with him on resolving this issue or having a more constructive conversation about this topic. Ground rule number 7, set your boundary. So set a relationship boundary if your partner's getting too triggered or is violating a basic ground rule. So the last suggestion, take a break, is about when you are getting too escalated or overly emotional, right? Your emotions are too strong for you to navigate the conversation well. Number 7 is about when your partner is having that experience and is getting too reactive or is violating a basic ground rule. So episode 51 will go into this in much more depth. It's all about relationship boundary basics. Excellent episode if you haven't listened to it yet. But in a nutshell, to set your boundary, just tell your partner you're implementing a boundary and leaving the room until they can be respectful again, and that you'll reconnect on this issue in a half hour or maybe 3 hours or whatever you think it will take for you both to be back in a calmer space. And then you actually do leave. Now, if your partner is listening to this, or if not, you can invite your partner to also set boundaries. If they feel like you are becoming too activated and it's making it hard to have a solution-oriented conversation, that's actually beneficial to both of you. When one or the other of you sets a boundary like this, it's healthy for your relationship. So again, if that sounds kind of weird and mysterious to you, definitely go listen to episode 51. It's going to clarify a lot of things around that. All right, number 8, come back to it. So this one's kind of follows on the back of number 6 and 7. If you did have to take a pause or take some space or set a boundary, come back to the issue when you're both calmer. Do not ignore what happened. A lot of HSPs are like, oh, I just don't want to go back to that because it's going to cause, emotional upset again. And it's just more comfortable to ignore it. Do not ignore what happened. Talking about what happened gives a chance for you guys to mend rifts and a chance to solve the actual issue, the deeper problem or the surface level problem or both. And ultimately, it gives you such a better chance to grow your relationship into more of what you want it to be that more connected, loving, supportive relationship you really want. So circle back to the issue when you're both in a better space emotionally. My last ground rule that I'm going to suggest for today is to remember you're a team in life together and that the goal is solving an issue between you, not being right. You really are a team in life together. This is not an adversarial relationship. At least it's not meant to be. And as long as you keep remembering that you're a team in life together and keep coming at things in your life together, like conflict, from this place of we are a team, like you really living that belief that you're a team in life together, you're gonna have so much less adversarial confrontation and conflict, and you're gonna really act as a team and be able to solve things together. So it's really going to keep you from seeing your spouse as a bad guy, as is so easy for us to do as human beings. And again, it's going to help you communicate as a team and solve things as a team. When you remember you're a team in life together, you're going to make lots of small decisions and little mini communications that help your partner know that you're a team, that you're on their team, and that you're in this together. And it will make conflict not really conflict. It will make it more like a problem-solving session that you're doing together. Yeah? All right. So those are the 9 ground rules to navigate conflict much better. And I'll just reiterate that list in brief really quickly. Number 1, don't interrupt. Number 2, keep to the issue at hand. Number 3, don't bring past issues in. Number 4, no name calling. Number 5, no yelling. Number 6, take a break. More coming soon on that. Number 7, set your boundary. Number 8, come back to it. That means circle back to the issue later. Number 9, remember you're a team. Now, I also have many other suggestions and support for how to navigate conflict for the least pain and the best outcomes. Of course I do. This is a huge part of my work in the world, right? But that's a great starting place. Now, it's also possible that you have a ground rule or 2 that I didn't mention here that might be important for you. If so, add that to the list. And now that you've heard and maybe added your 2 cents to the list, it's time to choose which ones to start implementing. So, if your spouse is on board with doing this, whether they're listening to this episode or not, I highly suggest that together you choose 3 from this list and agree to try them out. And you're off. Now, if your spouse is not on board, which I know may happen, I invite you to choose 3 for yourself that you want to try. And then do them and see how much it shifts things. I promise you that when you shift things on your end, it will change how things go between you because you are 50% of the ingredients that makes up your relationship, right? If you think about it like cake, if you took out or changed 50% of the ingredients, the cake would not be the same cake as it would have been if you had stuck to the recipe or whatever, right? You get my weird metaphor. All right. So one thing that I do want to make a note of, if your spouse isn't on board with choosing and implementing these ground rules, is that setting your boundary may be an essential one for you. Because it's absolutely something you can do without your spouse's consent to take a stand for navigating conflict in the best possible way. All right, if you're not sure that your partner's on board, maybe they didn't want to listen to this episode, what I suggest is to just simply tell them when you're having a good time or a good moment that you'd like to agree on some basic ground rules for those inevitable moments of conflict so that you can make those moments easier and be able to get back to ease and happiness sooner. And then ask your partner if they'd be willing to decide on them with you and tell them that it would mean a lot to you if they would be willing. Most partners will be like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm not super into it, but okay, I'll do that for you. Of course, if you don't ask, you won't get to reap the benefits of these as much because it truly does work best if both of you are on board. But again, do not despair. If your partner is not on board, again, think about that cake. All right, so that's the gist of the ground rules. I did want to add an extra very helpful tip for navigating conflict gracefully, and that's use redirects and micro repairs to keep things from spiraling and to stay kind and respectful in your conflict or interaction. So I invite you to listen to episode 157 for that, where I talk all about redirects and micro repairs. I want to end by acknowledging that the thing is, as great as these ground rules all sound, they're not always so easy to do, to actually implement for you or your partner, for most people. You might get too triggered, you might get too emotionally flooded, or you might find yourself so captivated by the bewitching spell of blame and bad othering and the backfiring tactics, or that captivating spell of I've got to fix this now, right? That you don't remember your own ground rules for conflict, let alone have the capacity to actually follow through on them. Sound familiar? In other words, implementing these ground rules for conflict is definitely not a snap of the fingers for most people, especially if, like most of us, you're not yet super skillful at freeing yourself from all the challenging emotions that come along with conflict and that just come along with intimate relationships in general. Because your challenging emotions, especially when you're not super skillful at navigating them, they're going to override your ability to put these ground rules into practice and to access your highest intelligence and your wits, right? So this is why over and over, I emphasize the utter necessity of learning how to soothe and guide and take loving charge of the harder, bigger emotions that tend to arise in your relationship, especially ones like hurt and anger and frustration and resentment. And other than coaching with me in Treasured, my coaching program, which is currently not open at the moment, the best place to start right away to make some really great traction on being able to skillfully move through and out and even prevent altogether these hard, big, challenging emotions that ransack relationships is my 7-day course. Stop taking it so personally. When you take this course and you're done with it, you're going to have a concrete process and many little skills to be able to move from hurt and anger into peace and even connection during any conflict or time of discord, and therefore be able to actually implement the ground rules and move through conflict in a way that actually brings you and your spouse closer and truly resolves issues in the best, most loving, most mutually beneficial ways. So if you haven't taken the Stop Taking It So Personally course yet, I consider it a must, really, for all HSPs. It definitely goes beyond learning how to not take things personally. It helps you, move through those emotions and move out of those hard emotions that really get in the way of all sorts of goodness in relationships. So to learn more about it and get access for a very low price, considering all that it's going to change for you, head over to my website, www.hspmarriagecoaching, and look under the courses tab. You'll find the Stop Taking It So Personally course there. I'm also going to put the direct link in the show notes. Also, I don't want to forget to mention my month-long live Foundations of Emotional Well-Being for HSPs program. It's an amazing course for emotional regulation as a highly sensitive person and being able to move out of those hard reactive emotions that hurt love and into emotions that actually grow and deepen love and just feel so sweet and good. So this is, again, highly recommended for highly sensitive people as well. In fact, this course goes beautifully hand in hand with the Stop Taking It So Personally course. They actually complement each other beautifully. They don't overlap much at all. So that's a course that opens and runs live periodically. So if you're interested in that, definitely hop on the wait list for that. So you'll be able to hear and have first chance to join when it does reopen. I will put the link for that in the show notes. And again, you can find it in that same spot on my website under the courses tab. And tune in to next week's episode where we're going to dive into more about a tool that no highly sensitive person should live without or love without. So I'll talk to you then. And until then, happy arguing and be oh so well.